Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for your interest in hearing some thoughts I'd like to share with you today based on ongoing work I've been carrying out in collaboration with the National Corporation for Antiquities and Museums and the French Archaeological Unit in Khartoum. Before I start, I would like to thank Louisa and the other members of the ASOR Early Career Scholars Committee for inviting me to present this lecture in the seminar series. With this title, Archaeology Under Fire, The History of Sudan Between Water and War, I wanted to express the long-term approach I'm adopting here to understand the continuous history of challenges imposed to Sudanese heritage over the years. Heritage here is broadly understood as the relationship between people and aspects of their past, which can be material, archaeological sites, for example, or immaterial, for instance, memories of lost landscapes. The continuous history of challenges to the preservation of Sudanese heritage, on which I'm focusing today, starts with the first dam projects along the Nile, which threatened and ended up deeply affecting existing archaeological sites and landscapes, and the local communities connected to such sites and landscapes. If my long-term historical approach has a clear starting point, its end is still unclear, since the internal war that has already destroyed so much is still ongoing. In this talk, I will cover four topics. The first is the impact of the war on Sudanese heritage, educational, and cultural institutions. Two is the history of heritage at risk in Sudan and its impact on local communities. The third topic is archaeology amid war, the tomb of Jehusi Hotep at the Sudan National Museum. And the last one, lessons on resilience from Sudan, thinking about the future. The first topic will quickly illustrate with images that recently emerged in the global media the devastating effects of the current war onto cultural heritage and institutions. Topic number two aims to contextualize the most recent challenges to heritage preservation, as illustrated by recent media coverage, in light of a longer history of challenges, especially during the UNESCO Nubian campaign. Number three will exemplify how past and present threats to heritage preservation are entangled in the preserved remains of the tomb of Jehuti Hotep in Khartoum. The last topic aims to offer an opportunity for us to think based on the perceived accumulation of past and present challenges and destruction about how Sudanese heritage has continuously remained resilient, having survived the major threats before. This history of resilience sends us today a strong message towards a hopefully collaborative future of preservation of and care for Sudanese heritage. Recently, in the media, numerous images of devastation have emerged after the Sudanese armed forces expelled the rapid support forces from Khartoum, regaining control of the capital. Under the army's control, it has been safe enough for media to report the extent of destruction caused by the RSF throughout the capital, including institutions, companies, houses. Images of the immense destruction caused by the RSF and Khartoum populate the internet. Here, for example, we see the remains of the presidential palace in central Khartoum, with all its architectural features virtually destroyed or damaged. A soldier stands in the middle amid stains of blood on the steps, attesting to the brutality of war. Among the targets of the RSF are universities and heritage institutions, a typical move of terrorists and other radical groups as seen in Afghanistan, Syria, and other places. They seem to think that attacking universities, museums, heritage sites will break people's legs and erase one's history, but they're usually mistaken. Here we see an image of the Faculty of Engineering of the University of Khartoum, and another image showing the extent of looting inside the buildings. The Sudan National Museum was a major target of the RSF, which had entered the museum already in the earlier stages of war in April 2023. Then they released recordings of militia fighters inside and outside the museum saying they would be protecting the area while fighting for democracy, which obviously wasn't the case. This is the result of their action, widespread destruction both in the museum's external areas and inside. This is an image of the ANCAM building, which is connected to the museum building. Having experienced them firsthand in Khartoum myself, I can say that there's no sense of preservation among them. There's only a destructive instinct, directed even towards the things from which, in theory, they could benefit themselves. In the external areas of the Sudan National Museum, various monumental sites from the now submerged Sudanese Lower Nubia are now preserved for future generations. These monuments once faced a major risk due to the flooding of the region where they were originally located as a result of the construction and operation of the Aswan High Dam. In the image, we see the garden projected by Hinkel with the preserved temples of Semna East and West, Buhen, and Aksha, the tomb of Jehuti-Hotep, as well as the rock inscriptions. The monuments dismantled and relocated from Lower Nubia prior to flooding have been placed in the museum's garden along an artificial river as an attempt to offer visitors a sense of the lost landscape from where these monuments came from. The monuments preserved in the museum's outer areas are unique attestations of the ancient Egyptian presence in Nubia, including rare evidence about local deities such as Dedum worshipped at Semna. These remains have been long ago published, but I'm sure any attempts to redocument these temples with state-of-the-art techniques would reveal new information. Apart from the epigraphic evidence, the architecture of these temples can also reveal useful information about Egyptian-Nubian interactions in antiquity. Damage to these remains had already been reported at the very beginning of the war, as can be seen in this image from April 2023. The red arrows point to what then was considered likely damage to the structures protecting the remains of the temples of Buhen, Semna, and Aksha. After the army regained control over Khartoum, images from the inside the protective structures started to emerge and we should soon have an accurate idea of the extent of the damage inflicted upon these monuments. Now we enter the second part of my presentation. The inauguration of the Sudan National Museum is intimately connected with the salvage work carried out in Sudanese Lower Nubia, especially during the UNESCO Nubian campaign. Its construction began before that, though, with the main museum building and associated offices designed by Alexander Peter Müller, an Austrian architect working for various companies and public projects. The building, which was finished in 1955, is a key example of modernist architecture in Africa, together with the Ghana National Museum. One of the first architects graduated from the University of Khartoum, who trained with Peter Müller, was Elamin Mudatir. He was responsible for designing the museum's entrance pavilion, also a key example of modernist architecture in Sudan. The outer areas of the museum were designed by Friedrich Hinkel, specially to house the monumental remains extracted from Lower Nubia during the UNESCO Nubian campaign. Hinkel was the responsible for dismantling, transporting, and rebuilding the monuments from Sudanese Lower Nubia to be preserved in Khartoum. Hinkel's work in Sudan was much more constrained by funding issues than the work in Egypt, the preservation of whose monuments also received significantly more media coverage than Sudan's. Such disparities resulted in major inequalities to be seen in the present regarding the conditions of preservation of various Nubian monuments across the borders of Egypt and Nubia, but also in various global north countries. Working Sudanese Lower Nubia relied heavily on local workforce and creativity to make the most with limited resources. For example, local workers from Dibera were key to rescue the tomb of Jehuti-Hotep from flooding, and yet those were the people who also lost their landscape and home in the process of saving ancient monuments. The case described by BBC broadcaster Rex Keating in his book Nubian Twilight clearly expresses the general colonial attitude guiding the efforts to save monuments at risk then. In his words, an amusing indication of how Nubians feel about their forebears was provided by the Spanish expedition from Madrid, who were digging an early Sea Group cemetery among the scattered houses of a modern village. Each morning, with unfailing regularity, an old woman appeared on the dig to lay claim to the property of her ancestors, as she described these people who died at least 4,000 years ago. She demanded half of the parts and human remains found, but you can keep the cattle and horns, she said. She could be silenced only by the leader of the expedition, Dr. Blanco Icaro, demanding that she, in return, pay half the cost of running the expedition. End quote. The first monument of Sudanese Lower Nubia to be dismantled for transportation to Khartoum was the tomb of Jehuti-Hotep, an 18th dynasty chief of Tekhet during the reigns of Hatshepsut and Thutmose III. The tomb was located in a sandstone hill on the east bank of the Beira, not far from the river itself. The first to work at the site was Thabit Hassan under the auspices of the Sudan Antiquities Service, then headed by Jean Vercoutert. Following plundering, Hassan carried out excavations at the site in 1955, recovering the objects now kept in Khartoum. Here, Thabit Hassan is shown with Nigadim Mohammed Sharif, who carried out salvage excavations in the Beira East shortly after Hassan's work at the tomb of Jehuti-Hotep. Mikhailovsky, Adams, and the then UNESCO director Olive Rioni are also in the picture taken at Faras in 1963. Hassan published a brief report on these excavations, which until recently had remained the only source of archaeological information about the tomb. The objects retrieved by Thabit Hassan are kept in the Sudan National Museum and remain an invaluable source of information, not just about the tomb of Jehuti-Hotep, but also New Kingdom Nubia more broadly. For instance, the scientific exploration of various object types can shed important new light on previously unknown research questions. The canopic jars of Jehuti-Hotep are a good example. Despite originally belonging to Jehuti-Hotep himself, as attested by the inscriptions on these objects, these were found across the river in the tomb of his brother and successor as chief of Tekhet, Amenemhat. Analysis of residue revealed no signs of human tissue, and it seems that the jars were completely filled with bitumen, a non-Egyptian practice also attested at Sai. The tomb of Jehuti-Hotep was the earliest rock-cut tomb of Sudan. It was decorated with inscribed lintels and gems, as well as exquisite wall paintings. The tomb's main chamber or chapel was accessed through an entrance from the west. This room was decorated with unique wall paintings showing one of the earliest chariot scenes in the Nile Valley, scenes of agricultural life, and a banquet scene. From this room, a shrine with statues of ancestors and a side chamber containing a shaft leading to underground funerary chambers could be accessed. Work at the tomb started in 1963. Hinkel led a local group of workers to dismantle the original monument. In this photograph, which depicts the beginning of the work, we see the demolition of the top layers of the sandstone hill to give access to the tomb's main chamber through the roof. Hinkel says that in order to cut the wall painting and inscriptions from the rock, it was necessary to remove the cracked rock ceiling above the antechamber and carve an 8-meter-long work passage behind the painted wall. Only then could the selected scenes be cut in blocks weighing 3 tons each. End quote. It remains obscure what criteria guided the selection of features deemed important enough to be preserved. For instance, the ancestral statues in the tomb's shrine have been left to be flooded, even though they contained important textual information about Jehuti-Hotep and his family. Thankfully, these have been recorded before the UNESCO Nubian campaign. Much is said about the great achievement, which was the preservation of entire Lower Nubian monuments, now in various places around the world. However, little attention is paid to the butchering of these sites and the principles that guided the decisions made during the salvage process. In the case of Jehitinhotep, the original context of wall paintings and objects is now lost, despite attempts to digitally reconstruct the burial landscape, with interesting results achieved by Johansson in 2014. Little is said also about the fact that besides the trauma of displacement, local communities were also employed to dismantle their local heritage, a process that, yes, resulted in preservation, but also in irreparable loss. The selected remains of the tomb of Jehuti-Hotep were brought to Khartoum and were reassembled as a tomb in an artificial mound resembling the original one in the outer areas of the Sudan National Museum. The blocks bearing decoration were placed on mud brick foundations positioned according to the plan of the original tomb by Hinkle. In this image, we see both the new placement of the original features and the loss of integrity of these remains, together with key information about the past. The rescue and preservation of the monuments of Lower Nubia has been widely celebrated as a victory in Nubia. However, together with the displacement of local communities, it is crucial for us to also highlight the immense loss of information that the flooding and the rescue of Lower Nubian sites produced. Archival evidence for Jehuti-Hotep provides us with examples of aspects of the loss of integrity and information of tomb features preserved in Khartoum, as for example can be seen in these pictures of the moment when the monumental block bearing the chariot scene of Jehuti-Hotep was placed on its foundation in Khartoum and then cracked. The preserved Lower Nubian remains at the Sudan National Museum attest to the resilience of Sudanese heritage. These sites remain relevant today as part of Nubian heritage, despite all the challenges and losses. Images from the outside of the reconstructed tomb of Jehuti-Hotep suggest potential structural damage to a structure which my team and I diagnosed as in need of immediate attention already in April 2023. While we wait for a full damage assessment, images like this show us that not all is lost and give us some hope. Moreover, again, they attest to the resilience of Sudanese heritage, which insists to remain. This is one of the decorated wooden coffins found inside the tomb of Jehuti-Hotep. Despite having been moved and opened, it seems to preserve a lot of its original integrity. In April 2023, in collaboration with Dr. Ikhlas Abdelatif, I started a new project focusing on the conservation, documentation, and archaeological study of the preserved remains of the tomb of Jehuti-Hotep and the objects excavated in the tomb and now kept at the Sudan National Museum. The project was interrupted by the ongoing war, which we described in a recent African Archaeological Review paper. The conservation of the preserved remains was a key priority of this new project. Considerable loss of integrity resulted from the extraction, transportation, and reassembling of decorated blocks during the UNESCO Nubian campaign. Over the years, the state of preservation of the tomb's remains and wall paintings deteriorated considerably. This means that it had become increasingly hard to extract information from these wall paintings. For instance, the current state of preservation of the chariot scene is much worse than when the first high-quality photographs were taken in 1960. Today, it is considerably more difficult to reconstruct such a scene, one of the earliest chariots seen in private tombs in the Nile Valley. Comparison with other 18th dynasty chariot scenes depicting activities other than war and hunting are key to understand the meaning of the Jehuti-Hotep chariot scene. The project also included a digital documentation of artifacts from the tomb, especially the decorated wooden coffins, which had been preliminarily studied by John Taylor. With the start of the war, it was impossible to finish the photogrammetric documentation of all coffins. Only 2 of the 9 coffins were finished. Hopefully, we'll be able to return as soon as it's safe and our Sudanese colleagues find appropriate to continue the work, especially regarding the conservation of the tomb. Sampling was carried out to investigate coffin manufacture based on lab analysis to be conducted here in Cambridge. These samples were lost trying to escape the war in April 2023. A study of masks and coffins from a neighboring site in Liberia, led by my student Hannah Eggleston, works as a mitigation strategy for this loss. The masks and coffins examined in this study are kept at the Gustavianum Museum in Uppsala, a long-term collaborator of my projects. Despite the major challenges imposed by the ongoing war, which limited the quality of produced data sets and prevented us from achieving our original goals, we produced a digital reconstruction of the reconstructed tomb of Jehuti as it is at the Sudan National Museum. In a context where Sudanese heritage kept at the Sudan National Museum suffered damage and remains inaccessible, this virtual model aims to allow people to reconnect with aspects of Sudanese heritage through virtual tools. The reconstruction also aims to provide historical and archaeological information on tomb scenes, architecture, and objects, raising awareness of the importance of the Sudanese heritage in a time of crisis. Now this work is part of a larger collaboration led by NCAM and the French unit in Khartoum, funded by the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This initiative will produce a virtual model of the whole Sudan National Museum, with the MacDonald Institute funded Jehuti project providing digital models of the reconstructed tomb and the outer areas of the museum. Contextualizing current projects and destruction caused by the ongoing war as part of a long history of challenges to heritage preservation makes it evident that Sudanese heritage is deeply marked by its resilience. Destruction, loss of material integrity, and historical information, displacement are not the main features that characterize the history of heritage preservation in Sudan. Instead, I think it is its resilience, which, despite trauma and major challenges, insists to play a key role in people's lives, as we could see when visiting the Sudan National Museum before it closed for renovations. Mohamed Bashir and Claudia Neze have recently published an African Archaeological Review piece, which is key for us to think about the future of Sudanese heritage and archaeology in the country. Among the questions they ask are, the war in Sudan is destroying much of the country's infrastructure, leaving the majority of the population in existential crisis. In that situation, is it ethically appropriate to invest resources in the archaeology and heritage sector? Another question is, given the scope of devastation and destruction, which components of recovery should be prioritized? They ask these crucial questions in a moment when the Sudanese National Army expelled the Rapid Support Forces militia from Khartoum, regaining control over the capital. The war is still ongoing, and it's impossible to foresee an end to it. However, thinking about the future now will prepare all of those involved, in a way or another, with the heritage of Sudan, to act when possible. Thinking about the future now is also important because it gives us purpose and hope. In their essay, they emphasize that priorities should be defined by communities, from damage assessment to future international collaborations. This is essential to preserve heritage understood as it should, as a relationship between people and aspects of their past. This is especially evident in the long-term history of challenges to heritage preservation I presented here, a history which is also that of local expertise in salvage interventions. Let us here remember the key role played by Tabit Hassan and Nigadi Muhammad Sharif in the preservation of the tomb of Jehuti and other Dibera sites. Contextualizing the recent challenges and destruction within a past of continuous challenges and damage to heritage makes it evident that there's a future for heritage in Sudan. Let us continue to learn and collaborate with our Sudanese colleagues to achieve appropriate aims in the preservation of the country's heritage. Key examples from the past and the present, and here I'd like to highlight the amazing work carried out non-stop by the Jebel Barkal project, allow us to catch glimpses of the future, thanks to the message of resilience that Sudan continuously sends us. Thank you.